On Friday night, US time, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that it is, what his words, a total disgrace that the G20 summit is going to be held in South Africa. That's in Johannesburg in a couple of weeks' time. I quote what he said: Afrikaners, people who were descended from Dutch settlers and also French and German immigrants, are being killed and slaughtered, and their land and farms are being illegally confiscated. No US government official will attend as long as these human rights abuses continue. And his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, um, he does what all of the Trump supporters do, is immediate applause. Afrikaners have been continuously subjected to violent racial discrimination by the South African government. I applaud POTUS's decision to not waste taxpayer dollars sending our diplomats to the G20 while this heinous violence continues. The F.W. de Klerk Foundation, hardly a bastion of liberal or radical left lunatic thought, has come out and said, stop telling lies. Stop. In the words of a statement issued in the name of their executive director, Christo van der Reede, it is now very important for all South African citizens to unite and refute the statements by President Donald Trump, his Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and others that Afrikaners are being killed and slaughtered and their land and farms are being illegally confiscated. This is simply not true, which is also the message of a letter sent to significant numbers of Democrat senators in the US by a group of what would we call the group? Professor Piet Croucamp, Professor of Politics at Northwest University, one of the signatories, a group of prominent Afrikaners, public intellectuals. How do we refer to you?
I would think minimize it to people of reason that realize that this message of Donald Trump is not only factually wrong, it's also harming and damaging to relations in South Africa. And I've spoken to the senator for Delaware, Chris Coons, last week, and he assured me that in America there's a general sense that what Donald Trump says is not true. He's enormously powerful. He's the president of America, but when it comes to this type of statements, many of them consider him to be something like a village idiot who shoots from the hip and shoots from the mouth, and then without the need to substantiate it. And there's a general sense of awareness in America that this is not true. But I think for us, I'm one of the signatories and I'm also one of the initiators of the project, to raise our voices and say it's firstly not true, and secondly, don't do it in our name, and thirdly, don't use Afrikaners to fight the identity battles of America. Don't abuse. It's almost like he's prostituting, I think, Afrikaners. And unfortunately, in South Africa, we have significant social formations who encourage that type of prostitution of the Afrikaners, the abuse of the identity, because we are certainly persecuted. The Afrikaners, our land are certainly not stolen or taken by force from us. Almost what he says is true. And it's a voice of reason.
Yeah.
I think that's important to us.
But a village idiot who shoots from the hip and shoots with his mouth simultaneously, so he draws one bullet from his holster and the other bullet from one of his teeth. I don't know, I'm sort of over-egging the metaphor here. He is in charge of government policy, and he is in control of a government that is in absolute thrall to him. He doesn't have anybody who questions him. He doesn't have a court jester who says, sir, you have no clothes. So it's all very well for there to be a general awareness in America that it's nonsense, but it informs American policy towards South Africa. And how does one convince Solidarity? How does one convince AfriForum that they're doing South Africa harm? And how does one? Is it possible to get a message through to Donald Trump when he is immune to reason, to voices of reason?
No, like I said, I spoke to the American senator last week, and I said to him that it's not. We know it's not possible to change Donald Trump's mind, because if it was possible to change his mind, somebody in America will have convinced him that it's the Americans that pays the tariffs, American business that pays tariffs, and he insists it's some foreign country and some foreign business that pays tariff. So you can't convince him. What we're trying to do is, I think Chris asked me, what do you aim to do? And I said to him, I want to reflect of your presence, a powerful presence in the Senate, and perhaps even further. I want to reflect a mirror image back to South Africa, to other South Africans, to tell them that we do not confuse black government and bad government with each other. Because we have to admit, the ANC has made a horrendous number of mistakes in the way that they govern South Africa. We don't deny that. But what we think is, if we allow conservative and right-wing voices who don't make the distinction between bad government and black government to speak alone, they will try to convince the rest of the world that black South Africans have a propensity for bad government. And we want to fight that because we know that's utterly racist. So what Solidarity and AfriForum is doing is a racial project. It's a racist project that we can't go along with. I've asked Flip Base one day, why don't you tell the Americans when you see them, why don't you write a formal note to the President of America? Because Jaco Kleinans keep on telling us that he has got direct access to the White House. Why don't you write a note to the White House and say that this is not a white genocide? Because Donald Trump keep on saying it, and AfriForum and Solidarity deny that they are saying it. I say, well, you have a moral obligation to then write a formal note to the United States President or to the White House and tell them that this is not true. Some of the things that you say about South Africa are factually incorrect. And then when you say that, he avoids the topic by saying, we're giving them the facts. Well, I don't know what the facts are that they give them. But the way that they say it's not a genocide, but then they portray white South Africans as the victims of 144 race laws, of farm murders that are deliberately politically aimed at white farmers. So the operational definition that they use is that of a genocide, but they don't use the word. So how do you say it's a genocide without using the word? And I think Solidarity and AfriForum has become masters in saying something without using the word. And it's utterly damaging. It's damaging, I think, for social relations in South Africa. If black South Africans start to say that, generally, as a rule, white South Africans, if you allow them to, if you give them political power, they will bring apartheid back. It becomes very, very hard to counter that argument. If Solidarity and AfriForum are the only ones representing white voices in South Africa, if there's not somebody standing up, a voice of reason, and tell the Americans this is not true, then black South Africans will start to believe that if white South Africans get any political power, they will bring apartheid back. And I must tell you, if you think about Jaco Kleinans, who is the front man at the White House for Solidarity, he comes from Orania. And there's no doubt in my mind, and I think in the minds of many black South Africans, that's the apartheid project. So if you tell me that Solidarity wants to bring apartheid back, given the prominence of somebody like Jaco Kleinans, I have to tell you, you might be right. You might just be right. And I think that's the message and the narrative that we seek to counter.
Yes, I can't speak on behalf of most Afrikaners. I can simply speak on behalf of the Afrikaners that I am acquainted with, either personally through engagements, private engagements, in the sense of they email me about topics and so on. And you know, if somebody has a name like Van Schalkwyk, I think it's reasonable to assume that they're an Afrikaner. And the vast majority of Afrikaners that I encounter, in the various ways I encounter them, are behind the South African project. They want South Africa to succeed for all its people. Yes, we are, and we should be critical of much of what government has done and is doing and is failing to do. But that doesn't mean that we want to return to apartheid. I don't believe that the majority of white people and the majority of Afrikaners want to return to apartheid. We're delighted it's gone and it's in the past.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And we have benefited more from democracy than anybody else in South Africa. We don't want to go back there. But I think there's a lack, an absence of a formal, mobilized voice that says that we can't allow this opinion that you've just expressed, rightfully so, to be that of a silent majority. It has to be expressed and it must be out in the open, because I think you're right. I think the vast majority of even Afrikaners They don't want apartheid back. 64% of all the business boards are occupied by white South Africans. Of the 30% functional schools in South Africa, mostly occupied by white South Africans. There's not a single statistic that white South Africans lag behind black South Africans. The white middle class is exactly the same size of the black middle class, but the black people are 53 million and the white people are 7 million. Do you see the massive unrealities of what is being explained here and understood? And if you speak to Afrikaners, if you keep on telling them they're a victim, it won't be long before they start thinking of themselves as victims. And sometimes I speak to perfectly reasonable people who don't think of themselves as persecuted. But when you keep on telling them that there are 144 laws discriminate against them, and they keep on thinking, they associate those laws with black economic empowerment, and they see the damage that the black economic empowerment, which is perfectly morally justifiable, but has been abused by the ANC, they start to associate those laws with the conditions in which South Africa exists, and many black South Africans have to live, unfortunately. They will start thinking of themselves as victims. If you keep on telling them that they are victims, then it's not long before that message gets some traction amongst white South Africans. We have to counter it by mobilizing against it. We cannot allow AfriForum and Solidarity and Orania to speak on behalf of all white South Africans until we start to doubt the fact that we are much better off than most people in the world. Let me give you one example.
Piet, I'm sorry, we don't have time for one example, but I do appreciate what you have already shared with us, Professor Piet Croucamp, Professor of Politics at Northwest University and a voice of reason.